Hey guys, today we're going to talk about time travel. Specifically, the world ending version of time travel that are paradoxes, and why, why they happen and why they exist, things like that. So, this discussion was actually prompted by a Discord chat where they were all talking about what you would do if you were able to go back and to basically go back into your lifetime, like to say 9/11 and prevent it. Well, a lot of people would say don't do anything that would make a historical impact, but but we ended up getting into like why it wouldn't even be practical to do that. There were things like it would be an unrecognizable future because so many people's lives were affected by 9/11. So many people were influenced or inspired or prompted to do things in their lives because of that. So many people would not have had a push in the directions that they ended up taking all those years ago to become who they are today. They wouldn't be the same people. They might not even be doing the same things. It's very likely that they would be completely different people. And so there's that. And the other thing is that it's the inspiration. The idea is that you could go back in time to prevent that because you know it's going to happen. But what happens when you return? The event never happens, so you never know it happens, and that in turn affects you. And the interesting thing there is that different works of fiction deal with that differently. For instance, Back to the Future, technically, the characters in Back to the Future are largely unaffected by the changes to the timeline. Like when Marty is traveling through time, he doesn't remember any of the changes, or his history is not rewritten in his mind. So when he goes back to the future at the end of the first movie, he doesn't recognize his home. It's completely different. Everything is changed, and he hasn't retained any of the information. Now, I'm not sure if eventually his mind sets to the new reality or what, but as far as you can tell from the first series of movies, Marty can recollect his life before he went back to 1955, as it was before the changes. So it seems like his mind is completely unaffected by the changes that he enacted. And then the thing in Back to the Future Part 2, there's that. He goes back in time, and the sports almanac, well, actually, he goes forward in time, and the sports almanac gets brought back. And that's interesting because Marty didn't even enact that change. Theoretically, you would have figured that Marty would have changed with it, but there might be some idea that because he was traveling through time while the changes were happening, that maybe the changes didn't catch up with him. Because in the end, he goes back to 1985, where Biff's alternate timeline had already taken root, and it turns out there's actually already a version of Marty in that timeline, but you never see him. Because they briefly explain that Marty's supposed to be in Switzerland. The idea is that he is, but the alternate Marty, or the original, technically, has come forward through time, completely unaffected. So that's really interesting, because in that version of reality, there was a large enough ripple effect in that timeline that it created a whole alternate version of Marty, unlike the first movie where he was able to return. And my theory is that in the first movie, there wasn't an alternate version of Marty because he was always destined to go back to 1955. 1955 happened on accident. All of the changes there happened on accident, and even if Doc remembered in the new timeline that Marty went back to 1955, he could just as easily use that as a bootstrap paradox concept to purposefully know that Marty's going to go back there, so he would know to set the time to set the DeLorean to November 5th, 1955, because that's when Marty was supposed to go back. So that's the reason why it all works out in the third movie, in the first movie, and in the third movie it's very similar to the first movie, in that all changes are accidental and without purpose. The idea is that whenever you go back in time with a specific idea in mind to change something, it should never work out, because the paradox would prevent you from retaining the information. And so all accidental time travel is with purpose. And what was difficult for me writing in time travel is the idea that there would be specific goal-oriented purposes for going back in time or forward in time, because there would be certain objections to withhold, to enact. But of course, like, if you enacted those objectives and succeeded, then how would you know to go back in time to do them in the first place if they had already been done in a new timeline? Well, the idea was that I had to write circumstances where where those events were preserved, no matter what, that they happened. You have to preserve the sanctity of history. In other words, you have to ensure that events in the past specifically happen that inspire you to go back to do something. You always need the inspiration to go back in time, otherwise it won't work. So you have to make sure that you have a purpose that withstands time, that will exist no matter what you do. Otherwise, your whole purpose in time travel will, cease to exist. You might not have even gone back because of the paradox catching up with you. So that's pretty much what I was just going to talk about. Well, I already did, didn't I? This is like almost 10 minutes, right? So, I think that's pretty good. I covered pretty much everything I was thinking of at the time. So the idea is that in order to time travel, you cannot go back with a specific goal in mind, at least not one that will alter the course of history in a way that you will not be able to retain it. So that's, in summary, what I just said. Thanks for joining me.